Hi everyone, welcome back to Pages of the Globe. Today I'm going to be reading to you the short story, The Father by Bjørnson. Before we start, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the author himself, and then we'll jump straight into the story. Now, Bjørnson is, first of all, a Norwegian author, so I don't know if I'm saying his name correctly, but he was born on December 8th, 1832, and he died on April 26th, 1910. He was a Norwegian writer who received the 1903 Nobel Prize in Literature as a tribute to his noble, magnificent, and versatile poetry, which has always been distinguished by both the freshness of its inspiration and the rare purity of its spirit. The first Norwegian Nobel laureate, he was a prolific polemicist and extremely influential in Norwegian public life and Scandinavian cultural debate. He is considered to be one of the four great Norwegian writers alongside Ibsen, Lie, and Kieland. He is also celebrated for his lyrics to the Norwegian national anthem, Javi Eskler det landet. The composer of the anthem was based off a composition for voice and piano on a text by Bjørnson, as did Anna Tschechner, who did Die Prinzessin. Now, he was a poet, novelist, playwright, lyricist, and he was very famous, especially during his time. He was very highly celebrated. Now, after graduating college and after studying for a few years in the city Molde, he realized that he wanted to pursue his talent for poetry. He matriculated at the University of Oslo in 1852 and soon embarked on a career as a journalist, focusing on the criticism of drama. Now, in 1857, he published his first peasant novel, Snove Solbakken, and then in 1858, this was followed by Arn, and then in 1860, and Glad Gut, and he just continued on. He was anxious to create a new saga in the light of the peasant, as he put it, and this story kind of perfectly immaculates that. He was a very mature author, and he was even appointed director of the theater at Bergen, a post which he held for 2 years. When he finally returned to Christiania, he undertook the management of the Christiania Theater and brought out his popular comedy of De Nifget, The Newly Married, and his romantic tragedy of Mary Stuart in Scotland. As you can see, he was a very spread out author. He had written so many different kinds of literature. And The Father is a famous, moral, almost parable-like story that has a very... It might be hard to tell what the true meaning of it is, but it does have a message. So that's what I want to share with you guys. But yeah, without further ado, let's get on with the story. Remember to like, share, subscribe, and comment down below which short story you'd like to read next. The Father by Bjørnson. The man whose story is here to be told was the wealthiest and most influential person in his parish. His name was Thord Overas. He appeared in the priest's study one day, tall and earnest. "I've gotten a son," said he, "and I wish to present him for baptism. What shall his name be?" "Finn, after my father." "And the sponsors?" They were mentioned and proved to be the best men and women of Thord's relations in the parish. "Is there anything else?" inquired the priest, and looked up. The peasant hesitated a little. "I should like very much to have him baptized by himself," said he finally. "That is to say, on a weekday?" "Next Saturday at 12 o'clock noon." "Is there anything else?" inquired the priest. "There is nothing else," and the peasant twirled his cap as though he were about to go. Then the priest rose. "There is yet, however," said he, walking towards Thord. He took him by the hand and looked gravely into his eyes. "God grant that the child may become a blessing to you." One day, 16 years later, Thord stood once more in the priest's study. "Really, you carry your age astonishingly well, Thord," said the priest, for he saw no change whatever in the man. "That's because I have no troubles," replied Thord. To this, the priest said nothing, but after a while he asked, "What is your pleasure this evening?" "I have come to this evening about that son of mine who is to be confirmed tomorrow. He is a bright boy. I did not wish to pay the priest until I heard what number the boy would have when he takes his place in church tomorrow. He will stand number 1. So I have heard, and here are $10 for the priest. Is there anything else I can do for you? Inquired the priest, fixing his eyes on Thord. There's nothing else. Thord went out. 8 more years rolled by, and then one day a noise was heard outside of the priest's study, for many men were approaching, and their head was at Thord, who entered first. The priest looked up and recognized him. You come well attended this evening, Thord. I'm here to request that the banns who may be published for my son. He's about to marry Karen Stordlane, daughter of Gudmund, who stands here beside me. Why, that is the richest girl in the parish. So they say, replied the peasant, stroking back his hair with one hand. The priest sat a while as if in deep thought, then entered the names in the book without making any comments. The men wrote their signatures underneath. Thor laid out $3 on the table. 1 is all I am about to have, said the priest. I know that very well, but he is my only child, and I want to do it handsomely. The priest took the money. This is now the 3rd time, Thor, that you have came here on your son's account. But now I am through with him, said Thord, and folding up his pocketbook, he said farewell and walked away. The men slowly followed him. A fortnight later, the father and son were rowing across the lake, one calm, still day, to Stordlane to make arrangements for the wedding. This thwart is not secure, said the son, and stood up to straighten the seat on which he was sitting. At the same moment, the board he was standing on slipped from under him. He threw out his arms, uttered a shriek, and fell overboard. Take hold of the oar, shouted the father, springing to his feet and holding out the oar. But the son had made a couple of efforts. He grew stiff. Wait a moment, cried the father, and began to row toward the son. Then the son rolled over on his back, gave his father one long look, and sank. Thord could scarcely believe it. He held the boat still and stared at the spot where his son had gone down, as though he must surely come up to the surface again. There rose some bubbles, then some more, and finally one large one that burst, and the lake lay there, as smooth and bright as a mirror again. For 3 days and 3 nights people saw the father rowing round and round the spot without taking either food or sleep. He was dragging the lake for the body of his son. And toward morning of the 3rd day he found it, carried it in his arms up and over the hills to his garret. It may have been a year from that day when the priest, late one autumn evening, heard someone in the passage outside the door, carefully trying to find the latch. The priest opened the door and walked in, a tall, thin man with bowed form and white hair. The priest looked long at him before he recognized him. It was Thord. Aren't you walking out so late? Said the priest, and stood still in front of him. Ah, yes, it is late, said Thord, and took a seat. The priest also sat down, as though waiting. A long silence followed. At last Thord said, I have something with me I would like to give to the poor. I want it to be invested as a legacy in my son's name. He rose, laid some money on the table, and sat down again. The priest counted it. It is a great deal of money, he said. It is half the price of my guard. I sold it today. The priest sat long in silence. At last he asked, but gently, what do you propose to do now, Thord? Something better. As they sat there for a while, Thord with downcast eyes, the priest with his eyes fixed on Thord, presently the priest said slowly and softly, I think your son has at last brought you a true blessing. Yes, I think so myself, said Thord, looking up, while 2 big tears coursed slowly down his cheeks. All right, so that was The Father by Bjørnson. Now I'm just going to give you a quick overview, a quick summary of the story, and then we'll jump straight into the analysis. So this is a short story by Bjørnson about Thord Overas, a prideful man who is humbled by the death of his son, Finn. So Thor visits, in the beginning of the story, he visits the priest concerning 3 occasions in Finn's upbringing: his baptism, his confirmation, and his wedding. Each time Thor pays the priest handsomely, using the occasion to basically just demonstrate his status as like a rich man he has like a son, he's just like doing great in life. Now, just before Finn's wedding, he and his father are rowing across a lake, and Finn falls overboard and just immediately drowns. A year later, Thor returns to the priest, but this time he's like looking haggard, he's almost like peasant-like, and he's just completely out of it. He sold all of his property, and he decides to donate half of the profit to the church. Now, if you remember, in the beginning of the story, he was the most wealthiest, most influential person in his parish to the parish priest. Thor's son has just been born, and Thor wanted him to be baptized. But when the priest asked for what name the father had chosen for him, Thor responded that the boy would be named Finn, after his own father. The child's sponsors are to be the best of Thor's relatives, and he has one more request, but he does hesitate in making it. Finally, he tells the priest that he would like his son to be baptized in a private ceremony the very next Saturday at noon. When the priest asks if he has any other things, he says no and leaves. And soon he rises and prays that God grant his son may be a blessing. 16 years go by, and Thor has never visited the prince. He finally comes again, and this time he responds if his son could be confirmed the next day, and he wishes to know which place the boy will stand in during the ceremony. He remarks that he will not pay the priest until he finds out, so once he tells him that the son will stand in first place, Thor gives the priest $10. Having settled his business, he leaves. Now, both of the times he's had kind of implicit requests. Now, 8 more years pass by, and he visits the priest again with several other men, and he comes to ask the priest to publish the marriage banns for his son, who is engaged to this young woman whose father is one of the men with him. And now the priest remarks that Karen, the girl, is the richest girl in the parish, and Thor merely responds, "So they say." He's just trying to show that, oh, really? I didn't even notice. And obviously this is just another kind of way of him showing how awesome he is, I guess. And when Thor places $3 on the table, the priest is like, "Oh no, it's just $1. But he says, since I only have one child, he wants to do it handsomely. And he accepts the money, the priest accepts the money, and the priest remarks that Thor has now appeared in his study 3 times on his son's behalf. But Thor answers, "Okay, but now I'm through with him, and I'm not coming back here for him anymore." And he folds his wallet and backs out. Now, in all these years, the priest is always remarking that Thor looks very young, he doesn't seem to have aged all, he's looking nice. But 2 weeks later, Thor and his son are rowing across the lake on their way to Finn's fiance's home, and Finn is trying to fix his seat or something, and he slips and falls. Now, Thor is trying to help his son, but the lake is super cold and his body quickly stiffens, and soon Finn just looks at his father and sinks down. Thor can't believe what's happened, and for 3 days and 3 nights, he's just trying to find his son's body by constantly rowing across that area. On the 3rd morning, he finally pulls Finn out of the lake and carries him home. Now, almost a year from that specific day, the priest enters in, he allows Thor in, and he sees, instead of the young, kind of happy man he had seen before, he sees a tall, thin man with bowed form and white hair. And Thor is the priest is "Oh my god, this is a rather late time to come meet me." Thor is "Yeah, it is." And then he just sits down, and the priest is "Okay." And Thor talks about how he would like to invest as a legacy in his son's name. Keep in mind, before he said that he was never going to come back for his son or have anything to do with his son anymore, because he was all settled in now. Now, finally, the priest tells Thor that his son had indeed brought him a true blessing, and Thor just crying, and he's "Yeah, absolutely," and he's completely agrees. Now, I understand I've been rambling on about the story, and you've already heard it, but I'm basically just doing this for you to kind of understand all the facts, because at first this does seem kind of a boring story, but there's actually a lot to learn in this story. It has a lot of symbolic medium, and it's kind of used to strengthen the ideology of Christianity. It mainly tackles the life of a father and its true world. As the head of the house and a parent for your children, anyone will do anything for their sake, just like Thord Overaz does. He visits the priest about 3 or 4 times for his son's account, and at first he paid the priest to be baptized by the son himself, and he's like very kind of hesitant about it, but he does want it to be like a completely private ceremony. And then he visits the parish again and uses his riches and being the most influential person to have an advantage with others, and he like wants his son to be first in line for the communion. And then third, he requests the priest to kind of produce some bands for the wedding of his son and his daughter-in-law, and he pays 3 times the original price of the wedding bands. Now, one day he like dies in an accident, and it kind of turns the tables for Thord to change his perspective about everything. The man that once lived in a lavish lifestyle turns into like a crooked old man with like silver hair, and he's just like looking very haggard, and he knocks on the door, finally enters in, and he decides, he's like, I've sold all my land, all my property, and I want to have half the money as a donation for the poor. Now, this is kind of his turning point, I guess, and the priest is just like the one stagnant person throughout the story, especially in the first part. Now, he is aware that the rich man is always giving him lots of spare money and overpays the service of the church. And I think that even like a person who insists to give more than the original payment, we shouldn't it wouldn't really seem like a priest would take it, because it is like a big, I don't know, maybe slap in that specific profession. And when I was reading through the story, a lot of I saw almost 10 reviews saying that priests specifically, should always remember that God can always see all of our actions. So for many people, the priest was also, in a way, like some sort of villain. But the most important thing to kind of remember while reading the story was that, like I said before, this is used to strengthen the ideology of Christianity. And during so many of these, I suppose, every single time Thord has come, he's obviously visiting the priest, he's visiting the parish, he's visiting the church, but he's not really using good ways, right? Like when he's trying to have his son be the first in line for the communion, he's using his power, which, considering he's in a church, it shouldn't even depend on who came first in the first place, but it's all about the relationship with God, and he's kind of damaging that relationship. And at many times it just seems like he's kind of flaunting his wealth and power, but he's doing that in a church. So, and since he's doing this on his son's behalf, the kind of moral of the story, or what kind of ties it all together, is his son ending up passing away. And that had to be the wake-up call for Thord. Now, obviously, the story was written a long time ago. It's published in 1860. So I'm not expecting the story to be something that is maybe makes too much sense. And while I was reading reviews and stuff, so many people were angry about this and they didn't really understand. But you have to remember that this is a parable. This is trying to just strengthen Christianity and what you should do if you are one, and how you should be right, do the right thing, basically. And so while he may have had a very maybe harsh punishment, he did end up becoming a better person, and he did learn his lesson, I suppose. Anyway, without further ado, that is it for today. Remember to share, subscribe, and comment down below which short story you'd like to read next.